they affects, they say, in terms of like reduced oxygen supply to the brain from some of these poor breathing patterns that happen, can last for years if you don't do anything about it after a concussion. And it might just start small, but it ends up being a snowball effect, so it just gradually gets larger.
Hello and welcome to the Straight Talking Doctor podcast. My name is Dr. Mark Cox, and this is the podcast dedicated to improving your health and happiness. My aim is to demystify the complex world of wellness and mental health through eye-opening conversations with guests from any and every walk of life. No topic is out of bounds, no question too big or too small. As well as discussing my guests' inspiring stories, I want my conversations to fuel you all with useful and actionable tips that you can adopt into your daily lives. In this first series, we shall be taking a journey into mental health, tackling topics such as dealing with trauma and depression, overcoming addiction, and beating cancer not once, but twice. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Please sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy the ride. Today's guest is David Jackson, an ex-professional rugby player who was once hailed as the Ryan Giggs of Nottingham Rugby. Following a career-ending injury, David has embarked on both a physical and mental health journey that has led him to discover and become an expert in calisthenics and breathwork. This conversation is packed full of useful information, and we cover a range of topics including head injuries, changes in career and the challenges that come with it, dealing with adversity, breathwork and nasal breathing, and in particular, the science associated with this. Jacko is a master oxygen advantage coach, and his insights and updates on social media are a great place for anyone looking to improve their performance or find some much needed motivation or inspiration to get up and move your body. Hello, Jacko. Welcome to this show. Thank you so much for joining me tonight and giving up some of your very busy and precious time.
No more precious than anybody else's. And happy to be here. I'm really fascinated by everyone within the sort of health and wellness space, and particularly speaking to, doctors like yourself that are looking outside the box is always a great conversation to be a part of. And I'm happy to share. Hopefully I've got a few little snippets around the breathing side of things that can help people that are listening.
Absolutely. It's kind of a bit of a surreal one for me. I've sat down with a few guests so far, but this one particularly, I've actually followed you for a few years. I remember saying to you the first time we had a chat, and particularly with School of Calisthenics, I'm not sure how many years now, but it's a bit surreal for me and quite exciting because, I saw you on Instagram doing all these crazy moves, these human flags, muscle ups, thinking, God, this guy, what a beast. And now I'm sat chatting, having a podcast with you about, the work you're doing now.
And you're like, oh, it's just a weirdo that talks about breathing.
It's interesting to see where you've taken your content and what sort of direction you've gone in now, because it's something that I'm interested in. So absolutely. And actually more so to that, let's go back a little bit in time for some context. You were actually a professional rugby player, something I didn't realize when I first followed you. A pretty good one at that, pretty high level. You played for Nottingham Rugby Club in the Championship. So can you tell us a little bit about your time there? What was it like being, at that high level of sport?
So I played my whole life. Like, I actually grew up in. I'm in Nottingham right now, and grew up in Nottingham. I played for so the folklore goes, I played for every team at Nottingham, from the under sixes to the first team. The only team I didn't play for was the ladies. So I was very.
You never tried to do that.
That just wasn't good enough. But I was fortunate to play for my sort of boyhood team. I guess I didn't go to any other rugby club other than at Notts, and really interesting time. I did quite a few different things whilst I picked up a number of different injuries. So I did some courses in sports psychology, sports nutrition. I did my engineering degree, so got a master's in engineering from Loughborough University whilst I was still playing rugby. So we were talking before we went on there, actually, saying how I like doing more than one thing at once. And the worst when I was playing my worst rugby was when I had nothing else to do and I was only having one thing to focus on. And actually I was far better when I had something else on the side to sort of, keep the mind occupied and keep sort of growing and learning. Yeah,
absolutely.
I like learning new things. So that's sort of anytime you get a chance to take something in another direction, I find it helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think it just keeps you slightly more stimulated, keeps that motivation going, doesn't it? And I guess for certain people that really helps. And then, so you were a professional rugby player for many years. I remember reading when I was doing my research a little bit for the podcast, BBC sort of described you a bit of a cult hero and things. And then something happened in the pre-season of 2013, and that led to a big change in your life. Can you expand on that for everyone?
Yeah, I think I'd just been there for that long, so the fans knew me because I was someone that was always there and did sport some fairly obnoxious haircuts at times. One being a mullet, which makes me sort of stand out, or adds a different conversation. But no, in terms of rugby, I'd had a number of head injuries throughout my career. The first serious one in an England trial when I was 16, like sort of taken Tostel, monitored overnight. I made a full recovery in a few days, but over the course of from 16 to 31, a number of different head injuries that just gradually were getting worse and worse. It was taking less to knock me out, and it was taking longer to recover from them, which there was this cumulative build-up that we weren't aware of. When I seen this in 2013 in training, pre-season, I don't remember anything of the day. I don't remember anything of actually. Well, interesting. I'd bought a Volkswagen T5 van to convert into a camper van 2 weeks before my head injury, and that day when I had the head injury was the first day I drove it to training. So no one had seen it before, and I apparently didn't even recognize it. So.
It's absolutely terrifying, isn't it? And my personal experience, I played rugby a little bit, nowhere near to the same level, but I've had a couple of concussions in my career. First one was worse, but the second one, I was old enough to really sort of think, God, I don't want that happening again. I remember the memory loss, the confusion. I was walking sort of offside and didn't know where I was on the pitch until someone had to sort of drag me off. And I didn't really plan on talking about this before the podcast, but you bring up a really good point about the head injuries and how things have moved on. So I did a short placement over in Australia with the Brumbies rugby with a sports doctor there, and concussion has obviously come on massively in terms of our understanding of it and our protection of the player. So head injury assessments, I guess when you were playing, what were they even a thing? And how have things developed?
Man, I was very lucky in that. So all it took to knock me out, I had a seizure on the training field and a bleed on the brain from literally two of us on the same team in the warm up, not tackling, no contact. We were playing touch. We were on the same team. Both tried to catch the same ball, and he just banged into me. And I remember. I don't remember what happened, but my jaw on this side, he must have hit me on this side because that's where it was sore. And it's one of those things that, like you say, like terrifying. It you don't remember anything because I'm so glad you don't remember anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. In my head, I know I had a fit and a seizure, but I didn't experience it. So it's not like it happened.
And you don't even have to have a seizure for you to lose the memory as well, which is even like so scary. It can be a minor thing in a way that you have a head knock and you don't really understand the gravity of what's happened to your head. And then suddenly you're experiencing these very sort of bizarre feelings, and memory loss is just terrifying.
Yeah. It was one of those things. So it happened that many times to me that my first memory on that day was being in the hospital, and I still had my boots and all my kit on. And I remember looking down at my boots, and I was like, it just was like weird. And then I was like, hold on, this has happened because this has happened a number of times before. I was like, oh, I know what's happened. I turned to the physio and I was like, I've been knocked out, haven't I? And he was like, yes. And I was like, I've asked you that before, haven't I? Not because I didn't know that I'd asked him that before, but because his reaction and how it happened so many times before, I was like, I've probably asked you that 100 times, haven't I? Like, so I was almost able to like, not laugh at myself, but I knew the situation and say I was lucky in that, lucky in terms of the recovery that I've made, but also at the early part of my career, when someone got knocked down, they couldn't remember anything. We just laughed about it. No one knew because you'd seen that happen, a few days later or a few weeks later, they're back to normal, and we weren't aware of any long-term issues. So it was just, it wasn't something that was took seriously.
And I guess the understanding has come on massively with long-term effects of sort of that early onset dementia. And there's a specific type, and I think it's the Will Smith film Concussion. Actually, I don't know if you've seen that. Anyone that hasn't, it's really worth a watch. And it's focused on the NFL and some of the damaging, lasting effects that were caused to the players there, that ended up with the NFL, being sued and having to pay out a lot of compensation and that sort of thing. But the benefit of what's happened there is that now there is an understanding of the dangers of concussion long term.
Yeah, it was, and I say the reason I was saying I was lucky was that NFL lawsuit was happening or had happened just prior to my injury. So when it was something that was being taken, now all of a sudden it was being taken very seriously in England within the RFU. And so I had that, and it was like, this is something that, but it's still, I went for so it happened in August. I didn't actually see the specialist and get told I had to retire until the Christmas.
Right.
So I still had a number of months where I was just going on, trying to get back to playing, just in a bad place, a dark place. I went back to hospital a couple of times, and they just told me to go back home.
Yeah.
It's because it was still massive gaps in the understanding of going, there's nothing we can do. Just go home and don't look at anything that's going to stimulate your brain. Just sit in a dark room.
And chill. Yeah.
And there is stuff that we know around our breathing that can help, around respiration, around doing some low level exercise. There is stuff, but it's not. Yeah, it's still taking some time to come forward, because it's the worst thing is having an injury and then not being told or not knowing when it's going to get better, if it's going to get better, just hoping it's going to get better, having no time scale at all, and then nothing that you can, or being told there's nothing you can do to help.
Yeah, you feel absolutely helpless.
Yeah.
So, David, you got to this point, you had the seizure on the pitch, you'd had a bleed on the brain, and you were told later, like you said, a few months later, that you had to retire. What were you going through at the time, I guess, emotionally? How did you take that news? Where was your head at?
A great question, and probably often I hadn't spoken about this for quite a while. I mean, it was back at, what is it? We're talking nearly, it's going to be 8-9 years, but done a couple of podcast interviews last few months where it's come up, and I've probably reflected on it a little bit differently at time now as time has passed. But something that was always just true is that there was a huge sense of relief, because I was actually scared that I was going to not give up myself. I wasn't strong enough mentally to say, look, lads, I am not good and I can't do this anymore. I was actually praying that the specialist would make that decision for me, and that is what happened. She was worried about telling me I had to stop, because she knew that obviously that meant that what are you going to do for a job and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, she was worried, and I was I was like, thank you. I was just relieved. But then your mind switches to, well, what are we going to do? But I was sort of full of a little bit of excitement of, right, okay, this is going to be a new chapter. What's going to happen? Get myself better. It took me a year to be able to run without getting headaches and some of my symptoms, but stuff was gradually getting better and getting back to some normality. Because there was a period where my wife was very good, because she just wouldn't. She is the expert in tough love, so she would never never what's the word, mother me. There was none. But
there's no sympathy.
I said to her once. So no,
pity.
There's sympathy, but there's no ooh, you okay? And that is what I needed, because it was very, you're in a depression is a side effect of concussions or something that can be one of the things, and you're at home, you can't do anything, because if you don't watch TV, you get a headache. If you read a book, you get a headache, and there's all these things going on, and so you're not in a very good place mentally. You're also missing the lads at the training. You're missing playing, and there's all those things. Your identity has probably been wrapped up to some degree in being a sports person. I'm not doing that anymore. But I had a worry or a definite concern of I can't as I stand now, it's like, I don't know, say it's like 3 months in, and I'm going, I couldn't hold down a job like this. And I remember saying to my wife when I was better, I was like, did you ever worry about like actually what we were going to do in terms of like, I wouldn't have been able, and she was like, yeah, but I didn't say anything because her view, and she was right. It was like, me saying that to you is not going to make it any better. Like, we've got to just try and crack on and see how we go. But yeah, that was sort of concerning and worrying. But
it sounds like it is an incredibly difficult time to sort of go through, because, like you said there, even the things that you highlighted, it's multifaceted. The change in your life, you're dealing with a physical insult that has got long-standing consequences, but then there's all the other things that you rattled off. So you're balancing a lot of stuff and not working potentially at full capacity because you've had a serious head injury. So getting over that must have been difficult.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people that don't make partial recoveries or don't recover in like personality changes or just like huge effects on cognitive function and that sort of stuff. And I had a little snippet and window into that where I remember going to the doctor after like about 4 months and him doing some like asking you some like simple questions of like, what day is it? And I knew what day it was, but then it was like, what year is it? And you're like, that's a bit tougher. And then can you count back? Normally a classic concussion one is counting back from hundreds in sevens. And I knew that because I know that that's one of the tests that they do. And he obviously had asked me a few things, which I didn't know the answer to. And then he asked me to count back from 100 in ones. And at that point, I'm like, I know what you're doing here. I know it's supposed to be sevens. And I know that ones is going to be really easy. And then I started and I'm like going 100, 99. And then I'm like 98. And then in my head, I'm going like, it's like, I'm like going, I know that this is easier than like, it's like, I know the answer, but I couldn't say it.
Yeah.
It was weird.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I know that this isn't good. Do you know what I mean?
So you clearly have come on a hell of a long way since then, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you've achieved and that you talk about, and that you're clearly very knowledgeable on many different areas. So what was the turning point, I guess, and where did you sort of springboard yourself to where you are now in that journey? What was it that allowed you to move forward?
Well, so I mentioned that I've been at the rugby club for very long, my whole life, and so I got on very well with the director of rugby or the CEO at the time, Simon Beetham, and he encouraged me he was like, take some time out to think about what do you want to do moving forward from here. And I'm really grateful for that, having some time where you haven't got work and you can go, right, what's this next step going to be like for you? What are your priorities? And I remember making some lists of like things that like are important to me and prioritizing things, looking at those things and going, okay, well, do I want to go and use my engineering degree? And it didn't tick enough of the boxes of things that I was doing. And then, the decision I made was to go into strength and conditioning. And I felt like that utilized my sort of love of science. I wanted to stay involved in sports still. I wanted to pass on what I'd learned to others and did some mentoring sort of to young athletes as part of that.
Just a quick one on what you mentioned there. I think that writing a list is one of the most underrated things you can do when you're faced with these big life decisions. And like you say, some of as simple as like the pros and cons or things you love or that you want to utilize when you're making these big life decisions, getting things on paper. Same really as journaling, I guess. It's massively
writing
important.
Stuff down at any time for anything is like
absolutely,
a win for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, when I was doing my research, I saw in a quote of yours in the BBC on the BBC Sport article, and it said in reference to your calisthenics work, it said you were quoted saying it 100% saved me. So I just found that quite a powerful thing. So first, can you just expand a little bit on what calisthenics is for anyone that doesn't know, and really what sort of impact did that have on you?
So calisthenics is the simplest way to explain it. It's body weight training. So rather than using weights and machines to provide resistance to build strength, it's using your own body weight. It comes from two Greek words, kalos and stenos, which mean beauty and strength. So some of the things that you mentioned, so like human flags and handstands and some sort of, so rather than just easy sort of bodyweight exercises like sit-ups and push-ups that people get bored of a little bit quickly. You take those basics and you expand on them, and then you could do some potentially, as we like to call them, we call it redefining your impossible. Because when you try and do a human flag for the first time, which is like your whole body out horizontal, you look at it and you're like, but not even before you try it, when you look at it, you like go, what? Is that real? It just looks like a fake picture, or is it Photoshop? And yeah, it feels impossible when you first try. But we sort of, we managed to use our sort of skills or experience as strength and conditioning coaches, working a lot within Paralympic sport, where you got to break stuff down and think outside the box, because you've got to change the training environment to suit the athlete in front of you, because they might not be able to do the bog standard thing that's in the textbook. So yeah, how did it the reason I say it saved me was because, and it probably sounds dramatic, but in terms of I was always like, if you ask anyone that played with me, I was like the motivated guy. Like, I might not have been like the most skillful, but if we're going to do something like a fitness test or anything like that, like, you will not beat me. Like, I'm just there for like just work ethic. Like, that's what I'm there for, and that's what I sort of prided myself on. I will try. I'm not very good, but I'll try hard. And what was really weird, right, was that when I finished playing, or before I finished playing rugby, I remember getting towards the end of my career. So I was 31 when I had my head injury. I just signed a new 2-year contract, but I was getting towards the end of my career. So again, I was very grateful for that. There's other lads that have had it right at the beginning of their careers. A friend of mine, Finley Barnum, a year or so after I retired, he retired as well in his like early 20s from the same thing, and he didn't have his career. So, but yeah, I remember like specifically having a conversation with one of the lads, going like, another one of the lads that we liked our weights and we loved our gym sessions as part of the thing. I was saying to him, well, mate, when I finish playing rugby, I am going to get so jacked, like, you won't believe it. Like, that's what I loved, the gym, and I was like, that's what I thought I'd like to do, basically bodybuilding. And when I could get back to training, it was like, right, let's do that. That's what I said that's what I thought I liked doing. And very, very quickly, I can't remember exactly how long, like, not months, like we're talking like weeks or even just after a few sessions, I'm in the gym doing like bicep curls or some rubbish. And I and I was like, what am I doing? I looked at myself in the mirror and I was literally like, what are you doing? Like, This isn't fulfilling you at all. And I was looking around at everyone else in the gym who were like, training really hard. And I'm looking at them going, what are you training for? Because when the rugby was taken, when I wasn't playing for a game, well, what I realized was all of my motivation was based on the fact that there was a game at the weekend, and you were going to have to perform.
Fitter and stronger than the person you're playing against. Yeah, I get that. And you need purpose, don't you, in what you're doing?
Yeah. When that wasn't there, I was looking around at everyone else going like, what are we all training for? and huge respect to people that I was like, you are training like I used to train. But I don't know, maybe they were, but it generally, they weren't necessarily, like, it wasn't their job. And so I was like, wow, and that's what really affected me. And that I was like, I'm not as motivated as I thought I was, which was an interesting thing to sort of check in on myself. But then what calisthenics did was it gave me something to get excited about and a goal to work towards. It wasn't something each week, but it was like, right, I want to do a human flag. Like, that is me. Like, I've decided it's captured my attention. And my motivation just went back. I just had that purpose for my training. And it wasn't anymore at all about like bicep curls in front of the mirrors to try and make your arms look bigger. It was not about how your body looked. It was about what you could do with your body. Yeah. And that mentally was so freeing in terms of like just our self-image and body image as well. As just having something to work towards.
Absolutely. I think a purpose can kind of be, you can kind of take that concept and put it to lots of different areas of your life. And if you don't have that purpose within what you're doing, you quickly lose that motivation that you need. And just for context, so Jacko and your colleague Tim have started School of Calisthenics quite a long time ago now, and teach people how to move their body in that certain way and how to perform these moves and break down very easily on Instagram these very difficult moves into certain chunks and certain easy parts that you can then practice and work on, making, I guess, the impossible possible for people, which is pretty cool.
We do our best.
I want to go into what you're doing now, because that's what really drew me to doing a podcast with you, which I think is absolutely fascinating, and it all revolves around the breath and breathing and breathwork, this new concept I've sort of come across over the last 6 months or so, I guess. And for you, it sounds like maybe the head injury triggered something in your mind about breathing, because I've read that and spoke to you a little bit about it changed the way you were breathing. It affected your respiratory function. Can you tell us a little bit about that for you, and maybe a little bit of the science that you're aware of why that can happen?
Yeah, sure. No, great question. I'd love to. And this can happen with any concussion. Like, it doesn't have, and to be concussed, you don't have to be knocked out. You don't have to be out cold. And you certainly don't have to have a seizure or anything like that. And so, banging your head against the kitchen units or whatever, people bang their head all the time. And it's something to be aware of the symptoms, and also like being aware of like, is it affecting our breathing? I think for me, it came as a part of, so I had the head injury in 2013, and I probably went for a good 3 or 4 years with no idea about this whatsoever. I was cracking on relearning to be a strength and conditioning coach, and that being a strength and conditioning coach, and I still I'm that, and still run the school Calisthenics, and we're still teaching calisthenics. It's the breathwork is something that was came on my radar from a point of view where I was starting to explore the fact that I just didn't, it was almost like intuition, right? I just didn't feel like fully, like if I made a full recovery, yeah, I feel like, the way I described it to you is that I felt like I was going through life and training and stuff, like the handbrake was just ever so slightly on.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
And like people go, like I was running like a 20-minute 5K, which for some people is like, well, it's well fast, like, and but it felt like I had the handbrake on slightly. And I had some sort of like issues around my, like, so as part of my head injury, I had like a whiplash. So I had some issues around like C5, C6 for a while. And like, just, things around my neck and my shoulder, like that, just almost something in the background wasn't quite right. And then, I wouldn't have been able to piece this together if I hadn't have gone through some of the teachings that I'd learned with all the strength and conditioning, like education that we were doing, where you start to understand how the body functions a little bit better, and then start to have an appreciation for how different parts of the body are going to affect others. And then something that sort of ticked the box for me of like, right, what could be affecting how I feel? What could be affecting like my neck, tightness in my shoulders, and things like that's going on in the background that I might not be aware of. And breathing was one of those things that, okay, breathing is a movement pattern, just like a squat is a movement pattern. You potentially do 20, 25,000 repetitions of breathing a day. And I had enough of an understanding that if you do something wrong 25,000 times, even if it's just a tiny little bit wrong, then that's going to have some quite profound effects potentially. I got put onto the Oxygen Advantage by Richie Norton, the Strength Temple. He was like, if you want to take a deep dive into breathing, read the Oxygen Advantage book by Patrick McKeown. So I was like, no problem, read that. At school, I was terrible at English, and never read any books or anything like that. Like, and I'm bad at reading and spelling. And if anyone sees my Instagram post, I'm sure you'll find lots of grammatical errors within them. But I read that book so fast. I just could not put it down. I was like fascinated by it. It had just the perfect blend for me of like the science on the background. Like, so my sort of like science background was in chemistry. So it was like ticking that sort of chemistry box. I'd probably not really, I'd not really done an awful lot of looking into the chemistry of the body for a while. And it then things started to make sense. I came across some research papers that were saying that it was trying to suggest literally like 99.9% of the time, if you've had a concussion, you will have had some disturbance to your respiratory center in the brainstem. So the respiratory center is in the brainstem, and if you imagine that's like in the middle of the brain, when you have a concussion, I got hit on this side. You get like two impacts. You got the impact where the brain got hit, or the head got hit, and then the brain rattles and like hits on the inside of the skull on the other side. So you tend to have these two like points of contact. Then what's happening on the inside is like the respiratory center is just getting like rattled. The brainstem's just getting like shaken up and rattled. That sort of like effect can change oxygen supply to your brain. It can change your sensitivity to carbon dioxide, which is our primary stimulus to breathe. So this was one of the big things that came out, or first like wow moments of like, when you are, people that listen now, when you take your next breath and you feel like you don't think about it, it just happens automatically. The thing that the brain is monitoring is not oxygen going down. The primary thing that it's looking at as to when you take your next breath is CO2 levels rising in order to get rid of excess levels of carbon dioxide. And it's not to say that carbon dioxide is a bad thing to have in the body. It's actually plays a vital role in oxygen delivery and a lot of other things. But if what happens is we end up getting into some poor habits of breathing too fast, we start then breathing out too much carbon dioxide all the time. And then we create this vicious cycle of then changing our sensitivity to carbon dioxide, and therefore then want to breathe faster all the time, even when you're not doing anything. And then we end up like, we can't facilitate like good functional breathing in terms of the mechanics of using the ribs, articulating nicely to create space for the diaphragm. So we end up literally just mouth breathing because the nose is providing too much resistance for us. So we mouth breathe and we sort of upper chest breathe. So we get more stressed. We have higher levels of sympathetic tone and therefore like inflammatory markers. And then like all this tightness around the chest, the neck and the shoulders. And yeah, things just like can creep in that then but just becomes a snowball effect. And then if we don't, we need to do something to stop that. The effects, they say, in terms of like reduced oxygen supply to the brain from some of these poor breathing patterns that happen, can last for years if you don't do anything about it after a concussion. And it might just start small, but it ends up being a snowball effect. So it just gradually gets larger.
Well, absolutely. If you do something 25,000 times in a day, that concept is, it's like compound interest. It's absolutely huge after a while, isn't it? I guess it's multifactorial, isn't it? There's multiple things going on if we don't breathe in an efficient way, mechanically, but also I guess on a sort of scientific level in terms of the, like you were saying, the respiratory sensors in the brainstem, and therefore then the sensitivity to carbon dioxide. And, there's multiple things going on. I guess my question about that is, you realized that your breathing was off because you had a head injury, but actually a lot of people's breathing is probably similar. Why are we not very good at breathing?
Good question. There's a couple of things, and actually I'd love to give people some practical things to take away. One would be like, if you just think about your breathing now, if you just tune into how you're breathing, is it through your mouth or is it through your nose, like in and out? We don't need to be doing this in through the nose, out through the mouth. We want to be breathing in and out through the nose. Is it loud or is it quiet? And where's it coming from? If you put one hand on your chest and one hand just below your sternum, where your diaphragm sits, does it tend to be your bottom hand that moves, or does it tend to be your top hand that moves? And, if you find that you are breathing from the mouth rather than the nose, then that's a sign of dysfunction. If your upper hand is moving on your chest, like that's a sign of dysfunction. And if your breathing is quite loud, then that's also a sign. A little one that you could do, a really nice one, really simple one to do, is just measuring how many breaths you take in a minute. So just sitting relaxed and comfortable, put a stopwatch on for a minute and just count how many breaths. Just observe your breathing. Don't change it, slow it down or speed up, just observe it. And we're wanting our breathing rates at rest to be around 10 to 12. Whereas a lot of the time when people are experiencing low levels of stress just within the life, and maybe just like a poor work-life balance, or just emotional stress, or some physical stress, or anything that's bad sleep, and all these things can lead us to, without realizing, breathing then like much faster. Like I had someone the other day, was at 22 breaths per minute.
So that 22 would score on our hospital observation system. So there's a system in place in hospital that nurses take observations, and then if they, there's parameters, and if they are outside of the normal parameters, they score. So then the doctor is flagged and said, oh, look, so if a patient becomes unwell, often the first thing that actually changes, interestingly, is respiratory rate. So people become what's called tachypneic. So their respiratory rate goes up. 22 would definitely score on pretty much every system that I've ever, every system I've ever worked in. So I'd be called potentially to go see a patient at 22. That suggests that there's something wrong, potentially a serious infection or something like that. But I guess it feeds into what you mentioned before, this term sympathetic tone. And when the sympathetic nervous system, which I talk about all the time, is activated, which most of us or lots of us have, a constant low level stress, and our sympathetic nervous system is always turned on slightly. There are so many negative effects from that, including potentially breathing in a dysfunctional way.
Yeah. And it's people will be able to probably, even if they don't consider themselves to be having thought much about breathing before, that they'll know not only will it affect your breathing, but you've also got the other way around, like your breathing actually affecting that. So if you imagine, what does someone if someone's stressed, what do they look like? They look like their shoulders are raised, they're like tense forwards, there's a lot of flexion tone, their mouth breathing, and it's like, and it tends to be quite fast. And it's like, have you seen someone doing like this? And if they're like talking really fast, like talking is expelling air as well. Like, so if someone's stressed, everything's like high energy and da da da. And actually what that's doing, being in that state, like that is just driving this over breathing pattern, but also sending signals of stress, sympathetic tone to the brain. Like we associate, or we have this relationship between that faster mouth, upper chest, shallow breathing with our stress response. They go hand in hand together. So it's not like a one-way street, like they're both feeding each other. And that's why we can get so much of this sort of snowballing effect.
Yeah.
The nice thing is it can be, for some people, not for everybody, but for some people, it can be as simple as thinking about, well, let's just do the opposite of all those things. So what's the opposite of mouth breathing? Nasal breathing. What's the opposite of upper chest breathing? Breathing from lower down with the diaphragm. The difference between vertical breathing, that's shallow, well, deep breathing, that's more horizontal. Fast breathing, breathing slower. Loud breathing, breathing quieter. So even for some people, just being a little bit more aware of that, and practicing a little bit of time of like, okay, I'm going to breathe through my nose. I'm going to try to breathe slower, quieter, even just those things, slower and quieter. I guarantee you spend a few minutes doing that, you'll feel calmer.
Yeah.
There's a difference between if someone's really struggling with like anxiety, like just telling them to slow their breathing down and chill out. Like that's not going to do it. We need to give them some more tools to do that. But if someone's just generally like got into some bad habits, but they don't necessarily feel particularly stressed, or they don't feel like on the edge of a panic attack in terms of anxiety, that they can actually just think about breathe quieter, breathe a little bit slower, be a bit more aware during the day. It's not like we have to do an hour's worth of breath work every day to sort ourselves out. Not at all. Far from it. I think the opposite.
Yeah.
I think if I spend an hour doing good breathing, but terrible breathing for the other 23 hours of my day, which one's going to have the impact? Yeah. Which one's going to change habits? So I'm interested in helping people make breathwork normal. It's just, we should be breathing well as a normal part of our day-to-day lives, and just having the understanding of what those basics are. It can be as simple as that.
Yeah, it's another area of fitness, I guess, is trying to make that a normal thing to practice, or to even think about. And that just that struck a chord with me where you were talking about just getting someone to notice their breathing and then just focus on it and take a little bit of a breather, if you pardon the pun, and be slow with the breath, and take some deep, meaningful breaths. And actually what you're doing there is coming into the present, allowing your brain to focus on what is happening now around you. And that, as we know, if you have ever done any meditation or mindfulness, is the same concept of, coming into the now and allowing your brain a breather, really, to not be worrying about the future or the past.
Yeah.
You've mentioned nasal breathing a couple of times, and its potential benefits and how important it is. I was talking with a colleague of mine today who's quite into their running, and I was saying, I'm doing a podcast tonight with a chap who talks about nasal breathing. She said, there's no way I could do that. I've started running recently.
She can.
Yeah. She started running recently long distances, and she said, no, it'd be too hard. And I said, well, I'm going to get some information for you tonight. And I think it's something that I've seen a few times. I want more information on myself. I've had a little look at the science on why it's better.
I'll send her my new ebook.
Yes, exactly. There you go. But let's talk a little bit about why is nasal breathing so good for us?
Yeah. Okay. So this is where there's just like there's a sort of the crux to it. I need to think of a good analogy for this, but I'll skip the analogy of just being basically, if you don't use your nose for breathing, it's not surprising that you're not going to be very good at using your nose for breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's an analogy for you. I always wipe my arse with my right hand. I recently tried starting to do it with my left. I'm terrible at it with my left. Okay. But I could do it with my left. It's not that good an analogy because your nose is actually designed for breathing, whereas my left hand is no more designed for wiping my arse than my right. But your nose is designed for breathing.
I hope you're not wiping your arse as long as you're running for. That's why that analogy doesn't work.
It depends. It depends. And so I think it was like there was a paper. It was like Cottle it was like ages ago, like tens of years ago. I can't remember the date of it, but like a long time ago, identified 30 different. He said, and it wasn't even saying it was like at least 30. It was like 30 is how many functions of the nose he'd found, and he was expecting that in time we'll find even more. So at least 30 different functions of the nose that prove that it's designed for breathing, whereas the mouth is designed for eating. I always say, like, the two things are linked, right? Your airway is linked. Kids put a pea up their nose and like can snort it and try and eat it. Everyone can you can do that. It's pretty gross, but you can do it. Now, that doesn't mean you eat through your nose. Everyone thinks, when I say that, everyone's like, oh, this has just been stupid, right? Yeah, but you could. The same way your mouth is for eating, it's not for breathing. We disrupt the microbiome and the digestive processes by breathing through the mouth to start with. It disrupts that. Mouth breathing provides no protection for your upper airways. If you wake up in the morning because you've with a dry mouth, that's because you're dehydrating yourself by breathing through the mouth. We lose 42% more moisture when we breathe through the mouth than when we breathe through the nose. So we're dehydrating ourselves. Now, the slower nasal, your nose is much smaller than your mouth, so it provides more resistance, but in a good way. It gives your diaphragm something to pull against. The resistance slows down our breathing, which helps with oxygen uptake in the blood and in with the tissues. But if you're not used to doing that, as in breathing through your nose when you're running, like your friend, you'll be like, this isn't better, Jacko. This feels horrendous. Or you're even like her. Before you've even tried, you've just completely dismissed it already. Now, if your nose is blocked, it's because you're not using it. You know, you weren't designed with a blocked nose. It's there for breathing. And so we need to unblock it, and we need to then keep using it. And the more you use it, the more it stays unblocked, and then you get back to where we should be. Now, there are some things like... I'm not the expert in this sort of field, but James Nestor has done a lot of research in this. The author of
he's
Breath.
written a book called Breathe, hasn't he?
Yeah, where our airway, because of our facial structure over generations, has changed because for a number of different reasons. One of them being like our diet and not eating or being able to chew hard foods enough when we're younger, and so we don't develop the jaw in the same way. And so, like, a lot of the time, he makes his way of explaining it, I think, makes a really good point. There's no other animal in the entire animal kingdom that has too many teeth for its mouth. Whereas we have to have teeth taken out when we're kids because our mouth isn't big enough. And that's an absolute lie. It's not a lie. It's just like people not understanding, and we didn't realize. It's that the mouth we haven't got too many teeth. It's that the mouth has shrunk. And when we take teeth out, everything shrinks even more. And then what happens is you've got a smaller airway. And then when your airway is smaller, you find it hard to breathe through your nose because you've got a smaller airway, and then you breathe through the mouth, and then you get into those bad habits. Tongue posture. People will have, because of the space in the jaw was compromised, they then get lazy with their tongue, and their tongue becomes weak. The resting position should be at the roof of the mouth behind the front teeth. That helps keep the airway clearer as well. So when you start trying to nasal breathe and you're not used to it, yeah, it's hard. Definitely. I couldn't run to the end. I'm like, right, nasal breathing. It's all about nasal breathing, just like a bit like your friend. And I'm like, right, I'm going to try it. I got to the end of my street, which is about 50 meters. And there was snot just pouring down my face into my mouth. And I was like, this is horrendous. But rather than giving up on it, I went, I understand the science and the rationale that says I should be able to breathe through my nose. The fact that I can't is an alarm bell to me. Rather than going, oh, well, sack that off, it was an alarm bell to me to go like, you've got some work to do, pal. Like, you've still got some problems with your breathing, that you should be able to do this. And so that then became a daily thing for me of like, right, I'm committing to improving my breathing, to improve my health. And in terms of how I got into teaching it now was I tried to improve myself, having read like a book, but I didn't fully get it. And I was like, I need to understand this properly. So the author of the book, Patrick McKeown, has got a whole training framework, and you can become a certified Oxygen Advantage coach. So I did my training with him. Own it, not to teach it, only to just learn for my own self.
Yeah.
But the effects on me in terms of my running and athletic performance, but even more so like the effect on my ability to be more mindful. You know, you were talking about mindful before, like I was never any good at being able to like do mindfulness. And Patrick always said like the people that need to do meditation are the ones that say they haven't got time to do it. And it's like, and it's so true. But having my reason of, I had a desire and a motivation to improve my breathing because I knew how that would potentially impact me and my health and my longevity. So I was committed to doing that. And by doing that, I was spending more time being mindful about my breathing because it was one of the things I needed to do. And then I was nasal breathing when I was running, and then all the other stuff. It had such an impact on me that I couldn't not talk about it and couldn't not share it and try to help some other people with it as well. And from the training side of it, you know, if I'm going to talk to someone about training and talk about calisthenics, now that I know the role that like breathing plays in our physical ability to be able to perform, like I can't not mention it because otherwise I feel like I'm holding something back from you.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something that I knew at the start, but it's something that is just part of an evolution of that.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting when you hear stories about when someone adopts something new. I would say nasal breathing, but there's other examples, and they do it for a certain reason, then all the other effects that it has across their life. And I'm sure there's multiple things that you've noticed in terms of like the science of it as well. What sort of caught my eye and my scientific mind is that the nose is obviously full of cilia or little hairs, which clearly the mouth isn't, which are basically designed to stop particles going into the lungs. You want to keep the lungs as clean as possible. You don't want any foreign debris in there at all. Because you know, anyone that has a poor swallow, we don't let them swallow in hospital, and we'll give them thickened fluids, or we feed them through a tube into their stomach, because if anyone gets anything in their airway that shouldn't be there, like food, there's a huge chance that they're going to develop a really nasty infection. And so it's absolutely pivotal. So that just shows you evolutionary, in an evolution sense, that we need to breathe through our nose, and that it is clearly very important for us. The other thing that I've seen is there is some evidence that when we breathe through our nose, we actually release nitric oxide, which is something that we all produce in our bodies all the time. But high levels of nitric oxide is what's called a vasodilator. So it dilates our blood vessels. And so when you have high levels of that, we have dilation of the blood vessels. You get blood flow to the muscles, to the brain, which is always a good thing. It means you're getting more oxygen to your brain, which you only can imagine will help you function better.
Yeah, and that was a big part of my rehab. Like I was saying, the reduced blood supply and oxygen supply to the brain. So hugely making sure that we're improving how we breathe. And that nitric oxide, you said that there's none of that found in the mouth either. It's interesting. It's antiviral, so protecting us from things like COVID. Not only should we be wearing a mask, we should actually be breathing through our nose. And how that's not been told to us is crazy, because that would have a huge impact on people as well. It also, one of the interesting one from oxygenation of the body, when we breathe the nitric oxide in and take it through the upper airways and into the lungs, it helps distribute blood within the lungs more evenly. So rather than blood being sat in the bottom of the lungs because of gravity just pulling it down, it helps to distribute it a little bit more evenly. And then that's going to allow oxygen to be transferred into the bloodstream from the lungs more efficiently. rather than just blood being sat at the bottom. So again, another one for your friend when she's running, that nasal breathing will help her get oxygen into the blood and into the tissues. Well,
and that's how it works. One of the, I think, theories long term, how it makes it more efficient for you to do exercise nasal breathing when you are nasal breathing. Sorry, that you become a more efficient machine for that, diffusion of the gases from the blood and into the atmosphere and back and forth through your lungs.
Yeah. Well, and on that, there's one really nice study from a triathlon coach, George Dallam, in 2018, tested out this theory with his athletes that had been adapted to nasal breathing. They'd been nasal breathing for at least 6 months. I think some of them up to like 3 years. And they did VO2 max tests, nasal breathing, and then mouth breathing. And their respiration rate was 22% less when they were nasal breathing. So they had the same output. So they were they're basically doing less work in terms of breathing because they're more efficient at breathing, and all the way through getting it in, getting it to the blood, getting it to the tissues, all the way through that being more efficient. So if you're breathing 22% less, you're saving energy. You're not wasting energy breathing, and that energy then can be used for whatever it is, the exercise that you're doing.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've been doing your own sort of experiment on Instagram, I've seen, with VO2 max in terms of nasal breathing and showing your followers and yourself improving that VO2 max through nasal breathing, which I think is fantastic. Can you explain to everyone what VO2 max is?
So the maximum amount of oxygen that we can use within a minute of sort of like high intensity exercise. So the maximum you can do in a minute. One of the things that's been really interesting for me, in that I embarked on a challenge of trying to do my first ever marathon, and wanted to do it nasal breathing to just prove the point that, well, prove a theory correct to myself, and like to go out and actually do it, that it's more efficient, and so you're not going to be as tired, you're not going to hit the wall when you're running for that long. And I did all of my training at one of the guys at Vivo Barefoot, if you come across there, one of the running coaches there. And then some advice from Tony Riddle, the natural lifestylist. He's ran barefoot from Land's End to John O'Groats. He knows a thing or two about running a long distance. About training aerobic efficiency. So I was nasal breathing. And then you have to, when you're starting off, you have to run very slowly to be able to maintain nasal breathing. Otherwise, you're breathing so hard, like your nose closes up on itself, and you end up want to go to mouth breathing. So you have to just slow down a little bit at start to allow the adaptations to take place. But when you can work on improving your efficiency, working at 180 minus your heart rate, 180 heart rate minus your age. Sorry. Yeah. So for me at 39, it was like stay under 141. And at that threshold of where you start to lose your sort of go from aerobic to anaerobic seems to be where you start to find nasal breathing more challenging.
Yeah.
So what I noticed was, as you just honed this efficiency of breathing and just the whole aerobics and respiratory system together, was that I could, my pace at the same heart rate started to increase. So I might be running like a 6.5 minute K at 140 heart rate and nice nasal breathing. And then a few weeks later, I'm like looking at my pace going, I'm not looking at my pace. I'm making sure my heart rate stays low enough. And then occasionally you like notice, oh, hold on a minute. I'm running like 6 minute Ks now. A few weeks ago, I was running 6:30, but my heart rate is still 140, or actually heart rate's even lower. My heart rate's like at 138. And you're like, okay, this is really doing something. The aerobic efficiency is about being able to slow your breathing down to tolerate higher levels of carbon dioxide. So changing that sensitivity of carbon dioxide we talked about earlier on, because carbon dioxide in the blood is the catalyst to allow hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrying component of red blood cells, to release oxygen and let it go out of the blood into the tissues. You can still feel out of breath and have 98% blood oxygen saturation if the oxygen is staying in your blood and it's not being released, because you're breathing, you're running and panting like a dog, and so you're getting rid of all that carbon dioxide because you're too sensitive to it, and then oxygen isn't getting into your muscles and into your tissues as efficiently. So you still feel out of breath, and we then get this snowballing effect. Whereas when we train ourselves to breathe slower and breathe, it sounds a bit crazy. It sounds like the opposite of what you do, but actually breathing less air rather than more allows the oxygen that's in the body to actually get to the tissues more efficiently. So for me, and the proof is the fact that I'm running at a faster pace in terms of speed, but my heart rate is either the same or lower, meaning the system is not working as hard to do more work.
You've become more efficient.
I've become more efficient.
I've also seen you do something else in your training, which is completely fascinating. And the science, I think, that you can explain about this is amazing, really. And that's about breath holding. So tell me a little bit about breath holds and how that improves performance.
Yeah. So this is, I can't take any credit for this at all. This is all from Patrick McKeown and the Oxford Advantage and other people that have researched it, but we just take the research and try to apply it. So breath holding, there's two things with the breath hold. Well, or one thing is holding the breath is a completely normal thing to do. And one like example that gets talked about is the fact that like diving to try and get like seafood, effectively, like way back in the day before we could just go to Tesco and just pick it up. Other shops are available, you know what I mean? And so it's not like this crazy thing, but this day and age, it can be a bit, people can think you're a bit funny walking down the street or going out and walking the dog and then you're pinching your nose and you're holding your breath and going, what's all that about? But if you can't hold your breath for very long, that is also a sign of dysfunctional breathing. If I exhale and hold my breath, if after 5-10 seconds, I'm like starting to panic, that is a sign that you are too sensitive to that buildup of carbon dioxide that you're not letting out. Remember, it's not that you haven't breathed more oxygen in. There's plenty of oxygen in the system. It's to do with the carbon dioxide level. So the breath holding is a tool for training to improve our oxygen carrying capacity of the blood in two ways. There's an immediate effect and there's a delayed effect. So the research seems to show that there's something around the breath hold needs to be challenging, so you're having to like work really hard on it, and around 30 seconds or more. At this point, the spleen, which is acts like a blood bank, holds about 8% additional red blood cells. The spleen contracts and releases immediately some red blood cells, and I like to think of it as a way that the brain's almost having this noticing at this point. Okay, oxygen has come down. How can I help us get some more oxygen going around the system? Here you go. I've got this bank here. There you go. Have some red blood cells. And that lasts for about an hour or so, and then they'll get reabsorbed back by the spleen. So it's not a long-term thing. But when you do practice breath holding, you're exposing your body to these higher levels of carbon dioxide that are building up. And that will help to change the sensitivity you have to carbon dioxide to help you like restore those breathing patterns and breathe a bit slower and all that. So it's multifaceted. But the other longer term effect is where this EPO production comes in. So again, a signal that's created when the body is experiencing strong levels of hypoxia. So that's a fancy word for low oxygen. The kidneys will be stimulated to produce more EPO naturally. So it's a hormone in the body. So yeah, EPO produced more naturally by the kidneys, and then there's about a 3 to 4 day delay where that EPO means that the bone marrow will actually start to create some more red blood cells. So we can see literally, like I've never done it. That's something we actually probably need to try and do, is like actually have some bloods taken, do a series of training for X amount of time, and then have your bloods taken again. But they see it in people that practice a lot of breath holding, like in free divers, where they will have like an increase of like 5, 6, 7% of hemoglobin percentages in the body. So like showing that we have created more oxygen carrying capacity of the blood.
I find it amazing how the body just adapts to what we put it through. But that is one of these biohacks, I guess, that we can do something.
It's altitude
consciously.
Training.
Yeah, altitude. It's like a natural way of doping. You know, you're producing, you're causing your body an insult, and the response to it is giving you a performance advantage in the form of some lovely red blood cells that are the oxygen carriers of the body, which will help you do more and work harder and be more efficient, I guess.
That can help someone. That can help anyone, though. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be like trying to run a marathon to benefit from working on your breathing a bit. And people have been going to altitude to get benefits of altitude training for decades. All this does is gives you the opportunity to practice like breath holding. The research shows like the strongest contraction of the spleen after 5 breath holds. That's it. 2 minutes rest in between. So it's like takes 10 minutes to do.
It's really interesting hearing about these breath holds, and it's sort of jogged my mind of what my experience of breath work is, and listening to what you do in breath work is quite different. What I've done with breathwork is there's a community based in Manchester who do cold water therapy and breathwork, and it's called Reservoir Dogs. Shout out Reservoir Dogs. They
nice.
It's a great bunch of people, and they do these sessions. They run these sessions, and I think with that it's more there's multiple benefits that the guys report from that, but the main one and the most tangible one you feel is the mental health side of things, and this feeling of connection to the other people there. But part of that, you go down, there's someone who will do a guided meditation or a guided breathwork session. And they do what's called holotropic breathwork, which is basically breathing in and breathing out fast, and you're blowing off your CO2. You're delivering a lot of oxygen to your blood, and you highly oxygenate yourself. And then what you do is you do a breath hold. And that then flips things. The breath hold will flip things. You do sort of, anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes or longer than that, some of the guys can do. And the CO2 then comes back, and you get this sort of hypercapnic effect. And, I've had some very intense experiences doing holotropic breathing where you get this tingling. You can get what's called tetany, where you get, tightness in the muscles. And it's amazing what you can do with your breath. And I guess that's what triggered my interest in things. But it is interesting hearing about the potential benefits of breath holds and breath work in general, but from I guess mainly from a physical effect, and that more of the scientific terms there, with the EPO and things. I just think it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, there's because there's some interesting. There's a little bit like what you said there on when we're doing like the holotropic style or Tummo style, or people have come across like Wim Hof is obviously the most famous guy people come across. The understanding what we know about carbon dioxide being a stimulus to breathe. When we breathe heavy and breathe fast, like we're getting rid of that carbon dioxide. The reason I can hold my breath for 2-3 minutes after doing that style of breathing isn't because we've got more oxygen in the body. It's because we've got rid of the carbon dioxide, which is the stimulus to breathe. The reality of when we've got rid of that carbon dioxide, we haven't got that catalyst to allow oxygen to release into the bloodstream. But the stimulus to breathe is just being given. It's being governed by getting rid of that carbon dioxide. What we try to do from improving people's breathing on a day-to-day basis with the oxygen advantage is going right. Rather than getting rid of that carbon dioxide so you don't feel the need to breathe, we're going to actually change and improve gradually the sensitivity that your brain has to carbon dioxide. So in your general day-to-day, you can breathe slower and you can breathe lighter and you can breathe more calmly because you haven't got that stimulus to breathe quite as strong. So it's actually training that rather than it being a one instant little hit, if that makes sense.
We've gone through different bits on breathwork now, and you're a massive advocate for the potential benefits. Someone sat there, listened to the podcast, and they think, what are these guys talking about? It's just breathing, What is what would you say to people like that who are a little bit skeptical? What's your message to people about it?
I was there myself before. I never looked at breathing at all. It is going on in the background, and the body is amazing. The body isn't going to just stop breathing because you don't think about it. If you're doing it a little bit dysfunctionally, the body is also fine. It will carry on. But can you feel better? Things that we know that our breathing is intimately linked with things like our heart rate, our blood pressure, our autonomic nervous system. If we improve the way that we breathe, can we improve the way that we feel and the way that we function? Yes, 100%. And I had, I've got a GP that I work closely with that refers on clients that are struggling with like stress, anxiety, and often comes along with some like gut issues around that as well. And did have one person recently who we got on really well after the first session, but at the beginning of the first session, I could tell he was a little bit like, is this really going to do anything for me type of thing. And we had a good session, and we just did some very basic stuff in this first session. And after a week, he come back and he was like, Jacko, I've got to be honest. I didn't think this was going to, I was like, when I got referred on by the doc to do some breathing, he was like, what's that going to do? That's just, like I said, it's just automatic. And he was like, I can't believe in 1 week the difference that it's had. And all we were doing was some really simple, just stuff we talked about here about, just like, can you breathe through your nose? Can you slow things down? We noticed that he was doing a lot of sighing and yawning. And if people catch themselves doing that, that's a sign of dysfunctional breathing. And it's this, again, it's like, what's that? It's a fast exhale, getting rid of CO2. Your body basically your brain going like, oh, I don't like all this CO2, get rid of it. So what we do is we just very simply, after you've done that, if you notice yourself doing that sigh, then just pause. Pause 3, 4, 5 seconds, build up to maybe 10 in time, but a few seconds, just pause, hold the breath, just to allow that CO2 to build up that you've just got rid of. Not stressfully, but just for a few seconds. And it just gives you also a little bit of awareness about your breathing, give you something to think about that I want you to check. Notice when you are sighing. And then, and it was like, for him, it was like 5 seconds, these little 5-second chunks of just like stillness, of like stopping. It was like, it just changed everything for him.
Yeah.
It was as simple as that.
It goes back in, I guess, to a lot of people have no awareness of what they are doing with their bodies, or again, therefore then their minds, and they're just wandering. And if they're in a stressful time, I guess it feeds in again to being a little bit more present, and then you get the benefits of improving your breathing when you do become present.
Yeah.
So there's multiple benefits again there. I think we've covered so much, and I want to give people a few more tips just before, I let you get on with your evening. But you're someone who's been through, quite a great deal of adversity with your head injury and your complete change of career. On a more broad scale, you're hugely into the breathwork. But for anyone out there who's facing their own challenges or adversity, do you have any advice that sort of helped get you through, or that you've learned along the way, for anyone listening?
We'll start with the breathing, because one thing I was going to say about you mentioned a couple of things around the breathing that sort of just triggered something for me to remind myself of. Like, one of the things that you were talking about, that like mindfulness and that presence is happening in the present moment. I've found tuning into my breathing and trying to improve the way I breathe has like reconnected me to my body. And that might sound a bit weird, because I was like, this, if I heard myself say this 10 years ago, I'd have been like, what is that weirdo talking about? But when I played rugby, I played so actually that was I got given it 360. That's the number of games I played. They gave me that when I retired. I played 316 games.
I've been looking at that. Just behind your shoulder, Jacko has, for anyone listening to this on audio, Jacko has Jacko 316 on a shirt, on a rugby shirt behind him. And I remember reading, it was one of the stats I'd written down, that you did 316 caps for Nottingham. And he didn't mention it, but he's got over 100 tries. So this is a serious rugby player we've got on our hands.
But I probably, if you think 316 games, probably I bet over 300 of them I'll have been in pain before the game started. And just because, not like obviously we played, but just it's the type of sport where everyone's always got some sort of niggle. They've got something taped up or something, or whatever. So what you tend to train yourself to do without realizing, you're just dumbing down that like communication that your body is trying to give you, to say like, pain is a way of your body saying something's not right. So it's like, and a lot of people have like really bad pain or little bits of pain or just everything in between. But it's your body's way of saying, hey, look, this part of me doesn't feel very good, doesn't feel right. Like, we need to probably do something about it. And I just dumbed that down, I think, over a long period of time. And seeing injuries and pain as like my body letting me down, and then actually having quite a negative relationship mentally between me and my body, even though you are your body. But does that make sense? Like between like your head and your body. And I have a completely different relationship of this. I've not talked about this before, actually. This is a first for me to talk about this on a podcast. I've not really even talked about this to anyone before, but having feeling good about my body in terms of like, I want to say I can hear it, but I can't hear. It's not like an audible sound, but it's like I know it better. I can feel it better.
It's that understanding, isn't it? I've had a similar thing in a way with yoga. I mean, I used to play rugby and I used to go to the gym a hell of a lot, but I don't do that as much anymore. And at a certain point, a couple of years ago, I started doing some yoga, and it forces you to have a relationship with your body. And again, something I've not really thought about too much in depth, but it's so important, that connection. And I'd never thought about that with rugby either. You are in pain, but you have to dumb that down or numb it, because you've got to go out and do your job.
We had a pill that was just called Big Red. There was just these big red pills. It's like, give us a big, like, it was just a pain. I don't even know what painkiller it was. We called them Big Reds.
You hope it was a painkiller.
Like, just dumb the pain. Yeah, exactly. And then the other, so unrelated to, so it just engage with like your breathing, because it's the greatest gateway, or it's the easiest gateway for you into your nervous system, for sure. That's the easiest thing to when we, literally when we slow down and extend some exhales, that taps into the parasympathetic side, the relaxation side of the autonomic nervous system. There's a direct relation and correlation to that. And you can choose to slow down your breathing, and you're going to feel some physiological differences. But at the same time, being a bit more aware of your breathing and how you feel when you're breathing, where do you hold tension in the body when you're breathing, like, will help you just connect to your body better. Life, I think, and I'm bad for this, of like, we've got our phone and we've got Instagram and we've got this, we've got the emails and you can just busy yourself just constantly and never actually stop. And there's opportunities to do that with breathing. I think I never engaged in like, let's stop and be mindful. It was almost the breathing gave me a tool to do that.
And I think for anyone who has ever struggled with meditation or mindfulness, and then they go, "Oh, it's not for me. I've got a busy mind. I don't have a bit of time for it."
That was me.
I think with breathwork, the thing I've found when I've done it is it's a bit easier for people like that, like myself or yourself, to get into breathwork, because what you're doing is something 100%. Active. When I've ever like lay down, tried to do a guided meditation or tried to do it on my own, I find my mind goes quite quickly away from things. And when you're doing a breathing exercise, you can just do the 3-4-5 breathing, is something I've spoken about before. You could do some of the nasal breathing you mentioned there. Tons of different techniques that you can do, whether it's a breath hold or whatnot. You're doing something active with your mind. So you might not be doing quite the same as what a traditional meditation teacher would say, but actually you're still getting a lot of the benefits that we talk about with mindfulness. And I think it's a brilliant little hack, like you say, to get quite deeply into changing our physiology and changing our psyche, both in one. It's one of the easiest things you can do.
Yeah, definitely.
I love to round my podcast off with one final question. I ask everyone something fairly similar, and it's, what's your best tip? If you could give one tip to someone, if you can keep it to one, sometimes hard, it's fairly broad, to improve their health and happiness.
If you see the sea, you've got to go in it.
That could be my favorite.
That's my rule. That's my life rule. That's life rule number one. That's not necessarily a tip. My tip, I would say, this is just something that's been on my mind recently, of depending on what the type of people, like, we're often, a lot of us, and you're a doctor, you'll be the same, like, you have a aspiration, a desire to help other people. That's one of the reasons why I become a doctor. I love helping somebody improve their happiness, their life, their physiology, their well-being by improving their breathing. But I know that I'm the best version of myself to be able to do that when I actually provide and take some time to have some self-care. So being selfish, but it's not selfish, because it's so that you can then be a better version of yourself. And it's very easy, I think, and very noble not to put ourselves first. And I'm not talking about always putting yourself first, but there's a time and a place to like check in on yourself and go, how am I doing? And do I need to actually do something for me? Which might be, I'm going to actually stop, rather than doing this next task or this next job, which I feel like I should do. I'm going to take 5 minutes to go for a walk. I'm going to have a mindful walk. I'm going to think about my breathing when I'm walking and just observe some nice countryside or a tree or anything. Try and get in nature. Nature is very good for that, that parasympathetic, that relaxation and grounding you.
Self-care is not selfish.
Exactly.
It's certainly not. I completely agree with that. And I think I know a lot of people that put other people first, but it's so important these days with everything that's going on around us, how busy we can be. You never get a chance to switch off, but you have to make time for yourself. Something I'm hyper aware of now I've moved to London. It is bloody hard to get away from it all. But that's the way of the world. Jacko, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sitting down. There's tons of really useful tips for people. There's been a bit of a delve into the science and just loads of good, nuggets of life knowledge. So I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to keeping up with your journey with the breathwork and Oxygen Advantage. I know I've learned a lot. So anyone that wants to give Jacko a follow on Instagram, do you want to shout out your Instagrams?
Yeah, just say pleasure all mine, mate, and love. Thanks for having us on, and love the work that you're doing. And I could never be a doctor. Oh my word, it's just too hard. I can't imagine what it's like. So fair play to you, and tip of the hat to you and all of your colleagues. Instagram is Jacko Human Flag. We talked about that. That was because I like doing it. It's probably more about just being human these days than just being human.
Less flag, more human.
Website is the School Calisthenics is School Calisthenics, and the website is schoolcalisthenics.com. All of the breathwork and the more holistic health stuff that I do is with rootedlife.co.uk. And I'll send you and your friend my new sports performance breathwork.
Look forward to reading it.
So she can
absolutely
give her the tools to be able to nasal breathe. It will be, you just have to stick with it, and I promise it's but just at the start you got to take a step back.
Spot on. Cheers, Jacko. All the best. Catch you soon.
Cheers, man.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Straight Talking Doctor Pod. I hope you not only found this episode interesting, but also hopefully learned something that you can use to help improve your life. If you enjoyed the podcast, or even if you didn't, I'd be so grateful if you could go onto your streaming site and leave a 5-star review so that I can reach as many people as possible. Finally, if you have any feedback or suggestions for further guests, please get in touch with me at The Straight Talking Doctor on Instagram.